Okay, guys, I would love for you to do just a little favor for me here. I'd love for you to take out your pew Bible just for a moment. And to make it super easy on you, turn to page 1226. Page number up top. If you don't have one of the Rogue Bibles, that 1226 should land you right about at Ephesians 3:18. Ephesians 3:18 should be on that page. 1226. I'll give you just a second. We're only going to look at one other passage before we look at all of the cool stuff on our screens. And it should land you right anywhere near Ephesians 3:18. I want you to look at verse 18. Ephesians 3:18 says this: may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. Now, if you caught that, you live in a three-dimensional world. Whenever you want to order something from Amazon, it's got 3 dimensions, right? So what does that say? How wide, how long, how high, and how deep. How many dimensions is that? 4. Now, that's just a description of his love. I don't know, that may also be describing him, okay? That may not even be his grace. Maybe his grace has 5 dimensions. Who has any idea? Who knows? The point being is already we just get just a little hint from Ephesians that whatever we understand, the depths of something, whatever its purpose, however we perceive this world, that God is playing a whole different ball game. There's at least one other dimension, at least, that he's existing in, that we can't really grasp and understand and even fit in quite literally into a box. Doesn't work that way. Our world does. But the way that he operates, it doesn't. In, with, under, through it, sure. But he's not limited by our three-dimensional world. Then I want you to look at page 1277. Look at page 1277. 1277 should land you at 2 Peter 3:8. 2 Peter 3:8. And it should be page 1277 in your pew Bible. Okay? So here it is, 2 Peter 3:8. But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. So it's saying that even the way that God perceives time is entirely different. You're like, man, 1,000 years. And he's like, that was just a day for me. Inside out from you. So you just take those two ideas, and what do you have? You have that God operates differently in and outside of time. You have that he's working in a dimension and dimensions that you can't even fathom or understand. So what's cool about the Christmas story, especially, is there's times when you see God doing all of that, okay? In the Hebrew, there's a term called Malach Yahweh. I've talked about that a few different times, and that means messenger of Yahweh. It's very clear that when God speaks to Moses, he says, hey, no one can see my face and live. In other words, you're not going to see my face, Moses, not you or any other person. I'm holy, righteous, you're flawed. You won't live if you actually see my face. Okay. So then when it's not just an angel, but someone shows up to different Old Testament characters and says, take off your sandals, you're on holy ground, that's not something angels say to humans. And when it's not just a messenger, which is an angel, but rather Malach Yahweh, which is God's name and title and being and who he is, that's the messenger of Yahweh. Who's the messenger of the Father throughout the New Testament? Jesus. So Jesus says, if you want to know the Father, you have to hear my voice. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the second person of the Trinity, named Jesus, he's all over the Bible. He's not just trapped in the Gospels. He shows up in the Old Testament. So what is that? Day is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like a day. 4 dimensions. You're trapped in a linear world. You have a beginning and an end. He doesn't. So he can go backwards and he can go forwards. And he can do all this crazy stuff. Okay? And that's just the tip of the iceberg of how God operates. So what's so cool about Christmas is that God sets a cosmic clock that we can understand. He puts things in motion that you can wrap your head around. And could he have manipulated it all day long and twice on Sunday? But instead, he orders this thing in the sky that even as it's counting down and human events are happening, it all works within that box. And yet to such a degree of precision that you can't even hardly wrap your head around it. So that's what's really, really cool about Christmas. And I'll give you an idea as we start diving in deeper in today's text. In 1991, I went with my grandfather, as did my sister Erin and my mom, to Switzerland's 700th anniversary. 700 years. It's like one of those places you've probably been to where, like, the building is older than our whole country. You know, like, it's that kind of thing going on. And so we went over there because we have family and we have deep ties to that country. And I had a little journal. My grandmother made me and my sister keep a journal. And I loathed the journal when I was like 9. Come on, lady, with the journal. Every day she made me write in it. I have to be honest. I am so glad she did. Because insights into this brain at 9 or 10 are intriguing. Okay? And so there was a moment when my grandfather, typical Swiss, he just goes flying up the side of an Alp. Quite literally. He's going up the mountains. Here he goes in the Alps. And he's going up the side of a mountain. And I am writing about this. I'm observing it. And I talk about how high he went up the mountain. And I literally wrote that Grandpa was so high on the mountain, he was about 6 centimeters tall. What did I do? I very carefully observed him, and then I went, that's about right. That's tall. That's how high he went up, because he's this big, see? Now, was I precise? Yes. Was I measured? Yes. Did I write something and record it based off of what I could absolutely observe? Yes. And had you walked up next to me with a ruler, you'd be like, that's about 6 centimeters, kid. You nailed it, right? Like, I'm on it, I'm on it, I'm on it. Now, what's the problem? Well, the problem would be, as an adult, any of us in this room would measure that quite literally in any other way than how small the person is on the mountain. You know, you could say, hey, he's 400 feet up on the mountain. Hey, he's a quarter mile away, whatever it would be, right? So was I wrong? No, I wasn't wrong. So when I just want to kind of put this to rest as well. The scientific community, when it is being practiced in truly its pursuit of the gift that it was meant to be in this life, of just learning and exploring and growing and answering questions and exploring new questions and finding those answers as objectively as possible. That's a good gift from God. We are made in God's image. That's probably one of the biggest tragedies of the whole thing, is a lot of people who are deep, deep, deep in science have the hardest time wrapping their head around God, and yet they typically are doing things so often in the image of God, creating things virtually out of nothing many times that no one else ever thought of, and they make it. That's so much in the image of God, right? And that's kind of what God is, almost like this mad scientist. You seen a platypus before? I mean, there's things that he just like put together that's like, wow, okay, that's hilarious. Or you just bored that day? See, so he's got that in him. And there are people who do that in their likeness, in his likeness. But what that means is, I don't get wrapped around the axle when someone's like, well, this is such and such years old. I don't worry about that. Why? Because no different than me, they're going, the way that I know how to measure this, according to how I look at it, it's this big. And I go, okay. 3 dimensions, dealing with a 4-dimension God at a minimum. Linear time, 1,000 years is a day is like 1,000 years. And people that are 3-dimensional people, trapped in time, are walking around measuring stuff the very best that they can. That's how I look at it. Not a worry. What's cool about this story, though, is how God uses everything in our own world so that we could track and understand it. No different than you. And I think I talked about this the week or the week before that. When I put a baby on your lap, you immediately go into goo goo gaga language. You throw out the English language, and you make faces you don't normally make. You make sounds come out of your face you don't normally make. And you do all of that to communicate in a way that you know how to communicate to something that doesn't quite get it. So in a very, very cool way, God isn't necessarily, I wouldn't know if I'd say he's dumbing everything down for us, but he definitely wants his people, his creation, to get this story and to find proof and relevance in this story that would hang around in human history for all time. Super cool. So let's look at Psalm 19, 1-4. Here's the Psalm of David. He says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens God has pitched a tent for the sun." He's saying, everything that you see out in the sky, God has spoken it into existence. And it bears witness, that's what he's saying, to like who God is. And while you can't hear it, they're speaking. They have a voice. They have something that they're trying to communicate. And what they're communicating is, there is a God. We were made and we were created. And what's crazy, a lot of times we read scripture when there's stuff that like we just don't always know what to do with it when we read it. We just kind of sometimes put it in a junk drawer, like a spiritual junk drawer, and go, I don't know, that's just God talk. You know, like you don't always know what certain phrases or lines, what they mean. Okay, but that's what he's saying, right? Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, right? Now this is Paul in the New Testament, Romans 10. And what's crazy is Paul would quote Psalms. And this is what Paul says. "Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message. And the message is heard through the word about Christ. But I ask, did they not hear? Of course they did. Their voice has gone out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world." What's he quoting? He's quoting Psalms. What's Psalms talking about? The sky. And there's a few different times, we're going to look at one even after Christmas, where you may never have caught it before, where even the disciples are making an argument. And their argument for Christ is, hey, guys, you all saw what we all saw in the sky. Remember that day, that thing that happened? We all observed it. Every waking, breathing human being around saw what we all saw. That's actually a part of their argument for Jesus being God. Super cool. So this is what actually is happening in Romans. He's quoting Psalms. Then you look at Luke 21:25. Check this out. This is Jesus. Jesus says there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and the tossing of the sea. So Jesus also making the same look up to the heavens. There's something you need to pay attention to. Here's Genesis 49, 9-10. "You are a lion's cub, Judah." Okay, so what's Judah? The sign of Judah, the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Judah is who Jesus would come from. What's the symbol for Judah? Is a lion. Lion, Judah, Jesus. Family lineage, if they had a crest, a seal, it'd be a lion. The Lion of Judah. Who comes from the Lion of Judah? Jesus. Okay, beat that in the ground. Here we go. "You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down like a lioness. Who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." Now let me just clarify something before we look at some cool graphics here. Astronomy is a good thing. It's cool. Studying the sky, planetary movements and stars, that's astronomy. Astrology is when astronomy becomes a religion. And now it dictates to you what you do. And it begins to inform what you think and what you think is going to happen. And let me just say, so like the whole horoscope thing. And you may be sitting here going, yeah, but this one time I did this and it worked. And Listen, let me just tell you something. Every rock you look under, you will find something. So if you're like, oh, I've dabbled in that, and then when I learned, like it actually happened, of course it did. It's powerful. It's just the wrong power. But it's not nothing, okay? So what's really wild is like, okay, so then what's happening on the astronomy and even the astrology front? Because the Magi are interesting parts of this puzzle. They're kind of like the first sort of like scientists. They're into astronomy. No doubt they study the sky, the stars. But there's probably elements of astrology in their world. Some people think that they were Zoroastrian, which is still a faith to this day. Freddie Mercury, those of you that are into music, believe it or not, he's the only cultural reference I even know that was a Zoroastrian, okay? Freddie Mercury from Queen. It's the only person I even know of in a contemporary context as Zoroastrian. And so they believe in one God. They're just like, well, I don't know who he is, okay? So there's kind of this bizarre, cool thing that's happening way out east. And it's really interesting how God would bring them into this story. So I want to show you some clips because this is very, very interesting. Because just so you know, the world that you're a part of, secular society, what I'm about to show you, they don't challenge it. There's no challenge to what I'm going to show you in terms of what happened in the sky. The only thing that anybody challenges nowadays in our present context is whether or not everything that happened in the sky has any relevance to a baby being born. But there's no argument that the baby was born and it all happened to line up with the stuff that happened in the sky. That's what's really cool about this situation. There's no argument about how it moved because, again, it's a cosmic clock. It's that precise. So it's super cool. So these are actually clips and graphics from the History Channel of all things studying this. And they're not making the conclusion it's God, okay? But they are taking the very same kind of mathematical equations and tying into all of now the technology and the science that we have going to where they can literally back out the clock and show you what was happening. And that's what I want you to see so you can start kind of putting eyes on what I'm describing. Here's this first clip. Check it out. And you can just let it stay up here afterwards. This is the trip, roughly, that if we believe that the Magi came from roughly Baghdad, okay, they would have traveled 550 miles. Piece of cake, right? Tollways. Okay? Now, I don't want to blow up your Christmas best favorite memories when you're singing Silent Night and all the cute kids are up here, okay? But most likely, the shepherds, remember the shepherds are out in the fields keeping watch over the flock by night, right? And lo, the angel of the Lord came to them, right? The angel of the Lord said to them, fear not, for behold, you with me, right? Okay, so the shepherds aren't there when the Magi show up. And matter of fact, the shepherds are temple shepherds. They're not normal shepherds. They're set-apart shepherds. And they take care of all of the perfect sheep that would be born in Bethlehem that would then be marched across the Kidron Valley on Lamb Selection Sunday to where all of us would gather in Jerusalem and we would pick our favorite sacrifice on Lamb Selection Sunday. And they'd bring in all these little baby lambs that are unblemished and perfect. You call it Palm Sunday. 2,000 years ago, they called it Lamb Selection Sunday. And we'd all point out which one is going to be sacrificed for you and for your family. And where that stable is in Bethlehem. So all the angels had to say is, hey, he's in a manger, like he's here in Bethlehem. They knew exactly where to go. There's only one place that's reserved for these kinds of lambs. And so now you understand on Palm Sunday, when Jesus is 33 years later, when Jesus is being marched into Jerusalem, he's traveling the same path as these little, perfect, innocent lambs. In fact, when he's coming across the Kidron Valley, they're flanking him to his left and to his right. Everyone's gathered because they're picking the lamb, while simultaneously saying, this is our king. This is a person that's going to save us. And that's why the Gospels say Jesus is crying and weeping. Because he knows, A, they don't get it. And he knows, B, they're picking their sacrifice. Him. The Lamb of God amidst innocent, perfect lambs being marched in and being chosen. And he would be chosen 5 days later. So that's how all this ties in. So that happens like immediately, right? But these guys traveling 500 and 550 miles, that's a long trek. And if you're going to have gold, frankincense, and myrrh, right, which is symbolic of being a king, being a healer, and being a priest, I'll just ask you, if somebody was worth traveling 550 miles on a camel, how much gold would you give them on behalf of your empire? How much frankincense would you give them? How much myrrh would you bring them? And what would that look like, that caravan rolling into town? I would assume you'd protect it. So you can imagine this is just a massive thing that ends up to descend upon the people in Bethlehem, okay? And that's roughly the path. Now here's what's cool. I want you to look at this next clip, clip 2. This is roughly the path of the star, pretty wild. Because they're following it, right? They're following it. And then it kind of makes this left hook right there and sits more or less above Bethlehem. So that's what brings them to the town. They know enough about astronomy to notice what happened in the sky. And we're about to look at what happened in the sky. They notice what's happening in the sky. They loosely know enough about what's happening historically to know it's worth riding west like ASAP. But once they get there, what's funny is they have to ask Herod for directions. Hey, what's the full prophecy? Oh, you mentioned Bethlehem. Great, where's that? Right? And they're like, oh, you got to head south. And that's when Herod's like, oh, by the way, come back, because let me know he's there, because I want to worship him too. / I just want to kill him. Right? So this is all those dynamics. Like, they know enough that it's worth coming 500 miles, but they also don't know certain details, which is fascinating, which means that this whole movement in the sky is so rare, so bizarre, that it was worth them doing everything that they did to make that trip, okay? Now, what you're going to see next, and I'll just set it up before you hit play. There's something called a conjunction that happens in 3 or 2 BC-ish. Okay? If you were into astrology, you would have accounted the planet Jupiter as the king planet, okay? And you would have counted Venus as the mother planet, okay? Jupiter, the king planet, Venus, the mother planet, and these two appear to combine in the sky. It's an optical illusion, but they appear to come together, okay? Now, here's what's crazy, is where they come together, as you're about to see, is at the foot of a constellation called Leo. Those of you that understand any of this, Leo is what in the sky? A lion. So if you're into astrology and astronomy, you're like, whoa, the king planet and the mother planet just came together at the foot of a constellation called Leo, which is a lion, which is this must be a Jewish king from the line and lineage of Judah. This is what they're doing the math on 550 miles away that they're seeing up in the sky. So this is kind of how it would have looked. Check it out. This is next clip. It's very cool. So the two would have come together, and they would have caught this whole dynamic. And so at this point, this is sort of like, this would have been the first thing that would have grabbed their attention, right? It's like an attention getter from God. Like, hey, wake up. There's something you need to start paying attention to, like, every night moving forward. And so it got their attention because they all know the sky. See, this is what's going on way far in the Baghdad, Iraq, kind of area, all right? Now, here's what's wild. Is probably September, we think, 3 BC, or May in 2 BC, we see that the Jupiter, the king planet, passes by Regulus. Now, what's Regulus? Regulus is the brightest star in this constellation. Okay? It's considered the king star. Okay? So this is what happens then. Check it out. Here, let's check it out. Let's look at it. So what they would have seen in the sky is at this point, it passes over the king planet, passes over Regulus, the king star, in the Leo constellation, and it will make this move where it circles it 3 times on the top. Check this out. So they're looking in the sky, and then they start to notice something super bizarre with what this planet begins to do, is it's going to circle it 3 times. Maybe try the next video. Let's try that one. There you go. So they would have observed that right there. And it would have actually made that whole thing right there, it would have done that 3 times, what they call in astronomy a triple conjunction. in essence crowning the king star. So now, at this point, if you're a magi and you're into astrology, you're into astronomy, you know the history, now you're just totally wigging out, complete nerdville, load up the camels, time to ride, boys. This is crazy. This is happening. This isn't a nightly thing. And now they're on the move, okay? Now, you may be wondering, okay, what's up with all the weirdness? Okay, so it's called retrograde movement or retrograde motion. The way that I can kind of explain it like this, retrograde motion is this. Some of you haven't done the speed limit since you were like 14, okay? Some of you, if you can go 20 miles an hour, and I know exactly who some of you are, who have looked at me and said, you know, I'm not comfortable unless I'm doing 80, okay? One of you in this room is trying desperately hard to hit 200, okay? And there's no medication for that. There's no fix for people that like to drive fast. It's just who you are, okay? So what's retrograde motion? Retrograde motion is whenever you are passing another car, maybe it's the 50th car you've passed already on 610, and it's the visual look of that car going backwards as you pass it. It's not going backwards. It's moving forward too, but you're a moving platform looking at another moving platform. And from a moving platform, i.e. you doing 120, looking at another moving platform, i.e. a horrified, scared, innocent citizen doing 60, okay? They look like they're going backwards, but they're not. You're both moving forward, just a whole different thing, see? So what's happening visually that they don't know at that time is as the earth is spinning and as it's on its axis and everything else, all of this stuff is happening in such a way that it's not literally doing that, but it optically looks that way. Does that make sense? So there's a complete scientific explanation for what's happening. So that's what you call retrograde motion. Now, if that isn't enough, here, check out what happens. Now, just so you know, so that happens. This is what happens, what you're about to see literally 9 months later. 9 months later. Let's go to the next video. This time, it's Jupiter and Venus. Oh, no? We're out? We're out, baby. Okay. We'll put it in next week. Super cool what happens. Jupiter and Venus come together. And Jupiter and Venus, this time when it comes together, due to the optical illusion as well, retrograde motion, it ends up parking this star at the foot of Leo yet again. So now those two planets come together in perfect, like synced up, making the brightest star that anyone's ever seen ever. Okay? So when Jupiter and Venus, the king planet, and the woman planet come together, the mother planet come together, the brightness that hits the sky is unmistakable. It sits low in the sky, and then on top of that, because of the retrograde motion and that whole thing, it more or less hooks and stops right over Judea. So that explains why they're following it, and it appears to be moving. It's that whole dynamic. And then it takes a hard left turn, and that's where they end up within 5 miles at that point. And this also explains, if you ever wondered, why the star appears to start and stop and start and stop. And it would be no different if I were looking at something else moving while I'm moving. There would be times optically when it's moving and when it's not. And it's nothing else other than the optical illusion. So all I want you to take from this is quite simply, in a world that's broken and crazy and insane, everything you're dealing with, I want you to consider the level that God would go to draw to himself people that up to that point had nothing to do with his story. God would literally use a whole different group of people's beliefs, their whole religion, against itself for the purpose of pulling them into his narrative, for the purpose of them actually meeting the king of the world, the king of the universe. You have a whole group of people that are just knee-deep into astronomy and astrology, having no idea who he is, and yet God would go to this magnificent level so that people as far as Baghdad in Iraq, okay, and all of the recordings that even the Chinese would have kept about everything that happened in the sky, that he would leave behind this fantastic evidence, these bizarre occurrences that even science to this day wouldn't even dispute. And he would go to this level and leave all of this. Because why? Because Jesus would come to the world, and he is for everyone. As far as the east is to the west. And he would go to this level to speak the language of people who had no idea truly who he is or who he was. This is still the mission of Jesus to this day. This is still the mission of Jesus in your neighborhood. This is still the mission of Jesus in your schools, in your marriage, in the people around you that you deal with in business, that you deal with in your life. His heart is to reach the lost. And he'll do it by any means necessary. You've seen what he's done throughout the last couple months as we walk through this. He used famine. He used wars. He used people losing their nations and losing everything that they had, losing their cultural identity. He's done anything and everything throughout history, and the sole purpose is to pull people ever closer to him, to get their attention. Why? Because what he wants is a relationship with them for all time. And this is why Jesus, when he'd interrupt human history at the exact same time of all this moving in perfect synchronicity, to everyone on this earth, they're just kind of moving around in smoke. No clue how every little thing that they're doing is moving perfectly in synchronicity with what's happening up in the sky, so that at the perfect time, everything would come together. A clock that was started thousands of years in advance would hit zero right when Jesus would be in Bethlehem and he'd be born. That's the beauty of how God works in space and time. That's the power of what God has as he works in your life. Amen? Amen. So I got a few more clips for you on Christmas Eve. Very, very cool stuff, how God moves and interacts through human time and history. Let's pray.